Hey guys, so I know this probably isn't necessary, but this video will have some potentially triggering remarks featured later on, and since we kind of try and keep it clean around here, I just thought I'd let you know in advance. Timestamp will show up if you want to skip these parts as well. So yeah, thanks and enjoy the video. Carlos Ocelote Rodriguez has one of the most turbulent stories in League of Legends esports, in going from being backdoored by Xpeke, founding the incredibly successful organization G2 Esports, and now living a life kicked out of the organization he himself founded. While Carlos' incredible determination, outspokenness, and drive for victory would allow him to become an icon in the scene of esports, it would ultimately be these same reasons that would cause him to fall in the public eye. And so if you haven't kept tabs on Carlos since his drama a few months ago, I'd recommend you stick around to the end because things have actually gotten worse. In his beginning days of League of Legends, Carlos was the mid laner for SK Gaming and would compete in various smaller scale tournaments under the organization. These tournaments would fuel Carlos' love for esports, but perhaps more notably during this time, he would also begin to develop a live stream following, and while he was one of the game's top players, the main draw to Carlos was that Carlos was just himself. This army that Carlos began to build up shouldn't have come as much as a surprise, as he was a very engaging, entertaining, and an incredibly live or die personality. And though his time on SK Gaming had been a good introduction to what success in League of Legends esports looked like, Carlos was a man who wanted to go big. He always aspired to have a team on the biggest stage, winning the biggest titles, while also being passionate about the game and having some fun doing it, all of which are still core values of G2 Esports even today. But long before G2 would build the greatest European roster of all time in League of Legends, on February 25th, 2014, Carlos would reveal his biggest project yet, an organization called Gamers 2. Gamers 2 was a manifestation of Carlos, and it was almost as if they were one and the same. This was an organization built off his labor of love, drive to win everything he could, and his goal of having fun while working hard. And this team's announcement was especially exciting to Carlos' fanbase, as they would finally get to see their favorite player starring in his own brand new organization. You could almost compare this situation to Abai, who's the current co-owner of the team Koi and who actually gained his fanbase very similarly, while ironically growing this fanbase under G2. Except, you know, Carlos can actually play League above a silver level. In fact, Carlos would remain on Gamers 2's roster throughout 2015 until ultimately he would be replaced by some mid laner named Perk, who I guess turned out to be pretty alright. And with the arrival of Gamers 2 entering into the EULCS, they would rebrand themselves to G2 Esports, and as for Carlos, this was just the beginning of his dream.
It's been a long journey for G2, but the time is now! They've done it! G2! They have done, finally! G2 are your winter major champions! And ladies and gentlemen, believe your eyes! Abu Dhabi with the newest champions! G2 do the unthinkable. There is no chance TL comes back from this. They're already on to the Nexus turrets. This is what peak League of Legends looks like, and it comes from Europe. A world record. G2 Esports 3-0 will win MSI 2019.
Not only did G2 enter the top level of play in League of Legends, but they also did so in CSGO, Rocket League, and a lot of other games over the course of the years. And while these teams had varying levels of success, one thing undoubtedly happened throughout this period. In just a few years, Carlos had built an empire. According to esports charts, a widely used esports stats site, G2 was the third most watched organization in the world last year. And for reference on how quickly Carlos built this organization up, the teams ahead of him were Team Liquid in second and T1 in first, but when you look at these organizations and when they were founded, it's clear how much G2 had grown in such a short amount of time. So while I of course could go on and on about how G2 is clearly the most amazing organization to have ever graced this planet, this is a story about Carlos. And while he had certainly deserved everything that his organization had achieved, if things hadn't gone south, then I wouldn't be making this video then. So let's talk about that a bit. So to elaborate on what I mean by this, let's take a look at Carlos before hitting it big in esports. Now, I don't think it's a groundbreaking revelation to say that Carlos has always had an ego, or at least an incredible amount of confidence. I mean, even when reflecting on his creation of G2 Esports, he said his plan was to be a billionaire or broke. And whether others liked it or not, Carlos had always been able to remain true to himself, which allowed him to gain a lot of respect from the G2 fanbase as well as esports organizations in general. But I think the ultimate crux for Carlos has always been money. He has always aspired to be rich, been motivated by this aspiration of money, and isn't really humble about what he earns either. So while Carlos' unbridled confidence was initially what enabled him to create the powerhouse of G2 Esports in such a small frame of time, once he began to realize the significance of what he had built, his confidence began to shift further into the realm of esports. ego. And if you want a more visual representation of what I mean by this, let's take a look at his Instagram posts over time as an example. Here are photos from a few years ago, which are mainly a collection of G2 related posts, the occasional obligatory "I looked really good here" posts, but overall it's a mixture of his life and him supporting his teams. But in the last year or so, we begin to see the manifestation of what I'm sure many of you guys came to this video for, in Carlos beginning to create a god complex. And ultimately, a video posted to Twitter showing Carlos partying with Andrew Tate would be the tipping point in which Carlos' ego would cost him his own organization. Now, I'll very quickly explain Andrew Tate's character, since I'm sure most of you guys know who he is by now, but if you don't, here's the quick one-sentence summary. Tate is a violent, degrading, misogynist influencer who promotes toxic masculinity as the way to success. There is more to this, of course, but all you really need to know is he is just a disgusting person. So seeing Carlos at the same party with him naturally raised concerns and questions as to why Carlos would even be around such a publicly hated figure in the first place, to which Carlos has now famously responded with his signature honesty. And after doubling down on this defense, G2 Esports board more or less forced Carlos to resign from the organization he himself created, and Riot Games has ensured he is never welcome back again into their leagues. And so for a lot of people, this is where the story ended for them, as this obviously became really big news on YouTube, Twitter, and it was pretty much everywhere else. And like basically everything else on the internet, it quickly became irrelevant after something more interesting came along. But obviously, Carlos didn't just disappear after the drama, and if you haven't kept tabs on him since then, he has essentially become the non-imprisoned version of Andrew Tate. And here's the timestamp as promised earlier, in case you want to go past some of these next few moments, as I understand they have some sensitive content in them. And so if you do feel comfortable continuing watching this next part, then here's some examples of what I'm talking about. Essentially, Carlos makes tons of claims about escaping the mainstream woke media, made a multitude of transphobic comments, and if you want this new unleashed personality summarized, well, this video will about sum it up.
Andrew Tate is the man, okay? Are we the closest friends? No, we're not. We're close enough, but not close friends. But I think that what he's done for the world and what he's doing for young people is fantastic. He is inspiring the youth and inspiring men to be the men they want to be. And that I appreciate, I respect that a lot. So yeah, if you believe he's a piece of shit because he's misogynist, blah, blah, first of all, you haven't listened enough. Second of all, you're a sheep. Third of all, you use no critical thinking to make your own thoughts. Fourth of all, you're too emotional. Fifth of all, I'm sure you're a bitch and you look like a bitch.
And so I know you guys probably know that I end my videos with a more happy, like see you next time type ending, but that doesn't really feel appropriate to do here. So instead, I'll just end this video by saying if you do see this type of behavior, please do your best to ensure that it stops. And that as a G2 fan, I'm honestly pretty disappointed that our former CEO turned out to be this way. This video is also a lot more experimental, as I'm sure you can tell, as it's a lot more serious than my other videos. But if you did like this one, let me know, and maybe I'll make some more serious type videos in the future. But with that being said, thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and yeah, have a good one, guys. Catch you in the next video. Later.